Shiny Pokemon in the video games are super rare Pokemon that only appear once in every couple thousands of attempts, and are usually a different color variation from the original Pokemon to show off its uniqueness. The Pokemon Trading Card Game tried to emulate this in the Neo Revelation set in the year 2000 as secret rare cards, and with the first two shiny Pokemon being printed being shiny Magikarp and Gyarados. And in order to make them even more unique, they came with the rule where you can only have one copy of a shiny Pokemon in your deck, and even gave the Pokemon unique attacks compared to their normal counterparts. And you'd think a homage to such a rare, unique catch would have made them much stronger than the average Pokemon. But they kind of never made a splash. The meta they were released into at the time was already dominated by broken Pokemon and weird rulings that made sure they'd never see the light of competitive play in their first iteration. Fast forward 17 years and the Pokemon Trading Card Company has a new mini set called Shiny Legends. This set brought back shiny Pokemon nearly 2 decades after the initial release. This set featured the new and improved iteration of shiny Pokemon, with the remaining shiny Pokemon Shiny Ho-Oh, Shiny Celebi, and Shiny Lugia appearing as promo cards. This time around, Pokemon didn't feature the fan favorites from the second generation, but chose to highlight some of the more popular legendary mythical Pokemon from the series. Also this time around, the ridiculous energy requirements no longer existed when looking at these cards, nor did the 1 per deck rule, allowing players to sport multiple copies and build a strategy around them. With each of these cards having a more niche purpose, rather than being main attackers, this was their time to shine. The most anticipated of the shiny Pokemon was Shiny Jirachi. For a single Psychic Energy, this Pokemon would do 10 damage with its Stellar Rain attack, but the effect of the attack was why this card was expected to make an immediate impact. Stellar Rain would do 10 damage and devolve your opponent's active Pokemon. This effect not only devolved the Stage 2 Pokemon into a Stage 1, but all the way back to its basic form. During this time period, Gardevoir GX was one of the most popular and powerful decks in the standard format. Shiny Jirachi was meant to be paired up with cards like Espeon GX and Garbodor to create a powerful lock strategy that punished your opponent for playing the game recklessly. This didn't exactly go as planned, as many top players brought this card to the European International Championship in London right after its release, and only one player managed to find some success with it. So what went wrong? Players had anticipated this Shiny Jirachi would become somewhat of a threat and understood that a measly 10 damage provided wouldn't be enough, even if they were to devolve an evolution Pokemon all the way down to basic. Players began playing heavier healing cards like Max Potion, and all of a sudden this Shiny Jirachi threat was neutralized. A card that was supposed to fix Gardevoir GX matchup ended up being a big disappointment and didn't see much play after that one event. Another highly anticipated shiny Pokemon was Shiny Mew. Shiny Mew could use its attack Legendary Guidance to search your deck and attach 2 energy cards in any way you like just for 1 Psychic Energy. Players thought this card would enable toolbox style strategies or even ramp up your board in situations where you would fall behind. Shiny Mew also had a second attack for a single Psychic, Beam, which did 10 damage, and that's it. A few players splashed into their Drampa GX/Garbodor decks in an effort to play cards that needed more than 1 energy attachment a turn, like Celestial GX, but this card saw little success, as Shiny Mew simply sat in the binder without making an impact. This was one of the bigger disappointments of the shiny Pokemon, as this card was anticipated to make an impact on release. Shiny Genesect was one of the only shiny Pokemon cards we featured as a main attacker in a deck. Genesect paired with Venusaur had 1 placement at a tournament boasting over 1,000 players, causing players to re-evaluate the card. Venusaur would make grass energy on the board count double, and Shiny Genesect's Gaia Blaster read 50 plus 20 for each grass energy attached to this Pokemon. Genesect's ability Energy Reload read, once during your turn, before you attack, you may remove a grass energy from one of your other Pokemon to this Pokemon. This allowed you to freely move energies around to hit the perfect amount of damage without losing any extra energy unnecessarily. Once the deck became a known quantity, players knew what to expect and which pieces of the combo to chase down when faced with this glass cannon of a deck. This meant that the hype didn't last long, and the lone placement for Shiny Genesect remained, and as quickly as the card entered the limelight, it was forgotten. Shiny Volcanion also had a lone placement paired with Quagsire and Lapras GX. The idea behind adding the Shiny Volcanion was due to its dual pump attack for 3 water energies. A dual pump allowed Shiny Volcanion to do 50 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon, which softened them up for Lapras GX to take them out with its Blizzard Burn attack. Shiny Volcanion's second attack, Quad Smash, says flip 4 coins. This attack does 50 damage for each heads. If you had to use Quad Smash, you were probably in trouble. Using Quagsire's washout ability, which allowed the player to move water energies as often as they like from their bench to their active, and Aqua Patch to accelerate energy onto the board, players were able to use the various attackers in the deck to their advantage. However, the deck itself wasn't considered very good because if it couldn't produce and maintain energies on the board, the deck couldn't do anything. This led to the deck being dismissed as bad, and Shiny Volcanion never saw play again. Shiny Celebi was one of the more interesting shiny Pokemon that came with a unique ability, Time Recall, which read, each of your evolved Pokemon can use any attack from its previous evolutions. However, you still need the necessary energy to use each attack. There weren't any Pokemon at the time that had good enough attacks on their pre-evolutions, that is, in the standard format. In the expanded format, Pokemon cards from the Black and White expansion until the most recent set could be used for play, creating decks and combos that were never meant to interact with one another. There was one of Pokemon's only infinite lock decks, Shock Lock, that used Stoutland and Raichu to stop your opponent from playing the game. Stoutland's ability Sentinel would prevent your opponent from playing supporter cards while it was in the active slot, and Raichu's Evo Shock would then paralyze your opponent's active Pokemon when it evolved this turn, a condition where a Pokemon cannot attack or retreat for one turn. After the end of the turn with the paralyzed Pokemon, it returns to normal. Paralysis was one of the rarer stat conditions in the game that needed specific supporter cards like AZ to answer it, so Stoutland became the perfect answer. The Shock Lock player would infinitely loop the opposing player until they ran out of cards in the deck, winning them the game. But how did they manage to keep the loop going? Well, that's where Shiny Celebi comes into play. Lillipup and Stoutland's basic Pokemon pre-evolutions has an attack called Pickup, which allows the player to put an item card from the discard pile into their hand. You would use Pickup to grab the evolution spray, devolve one of your evolved Pokemon, and put the highest stage evolution card on it into your hand to continuously Evo Shock your opponent's active Pokemon. Using cards like Rescue Stretcher and Ultra Ball to recycle your Pokemon into your deck, the player would avoid decking out before their opponent. A very creative strategy, and one of Pokemon's only locked decks ever was born from this card. But all good things must come to an end, and Memory Energy was released. Memory Energy had the exact same effect as Shiny Celebi's Time Recall, and it acted as an energy card for Lillipup's attack. Just as quickly as Shiny Celebi found its way into this novel lock deck, it was replaced for something just a bit better. Towards the very end of their life cycle, two shiny Pokemon finally got to see some play, but not because they were particularly strong in any way, but because Malamar became one of the strongest energy acceleration energies in the format. Malamar would allow players to attach a basic psychic energy from the discard pile to one of their Pokemon, and because it did not specify once per turn, the Malamar player could accelerate energy equal to the number of Malamar in play on any given turn. This enables the first of the two shiny Pokemon we're going to talk about, Shiny Arceus. This Pokemon has the ability called Fabled Defense, that prevents all damage done to your bench Pokemon by your opponent's attacks while it's in your active spot. Shiny Arceus' attack, Ultimate Arrow, would do 30 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon for any 4 energy. While this attack cost was particularly steep, it nestled itself well into spread strategies that were becoming popular at the time. Paired with cards like Tapu Koko and Giratina, this Malamar deck could power up any of these attackers at a moment's notice to overwhelm boards with spread damage. There was a unique tool card called Spell Tag that allowed players to place 4 damage counters on their opponent's board in any way they liked if a psychic Pokemon was knocked out. This let us put perfect numbers on the board for potential KOs with spread numbers. Giratina was also a hard-hitting Pokemon that swung for 130 damage with its Distortion Door ability and could always bring itself back from the discard pile. This made the deck extremely low maintenance and had an extremely strong late game finisher in the form of Tapu Lele's Magical Swap, which for a psychic and colorless allowed you to move around damage counters on your opponent's board as you see fit. This would set up for some 6-prize turns all at once, snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. Spread decks, however, had one small problem: their damage output. If an opposing player played smartly and didn't bench too many Pokemon or played healing cards, it became difficult to get damage to stick on the board. Oftentimes, because of low damage output, the spread deck would lose by a turn or two, even if everything was going their way. This made Spread and Shiny Arceus a gimmick strategy at best, and besides a handful of placements, it didn't see too much competitive play. The most vanilla of the shiny Pokemon, Shiny Lugia, saw the most success. Shiny Lugia came with 2 attacks, the first being Argent Wing, which for 3 colorless energy swung for 60 and an additional 60 of your opponent's active Pokemon had an ability. The second attack, requiring 4 colorless energy and swung for 130 damage, with the downside being that Shiny Lugia had to discard energy for the attack. One of the biggest reasons that Lugia began seeing play was the rise in decks that centered around the Shrine of Punishment. This stadium placed a single damage counter in between turns on Pokemon GX and Pokemon EX on both sides of the field. There were a few decks that would only place single prize attackers like Buzzwole, making it difficult for some of these powerhouse big beater decks to prize trade efficiently. That's where Shiny Lugia came into play, being able to trade 1-for-1 against a lot of these single prize decks, and having fighting resistance meant that a handful of these single prize matchups went from an auto loss to even. Shiny Lugia made its first appearance in Malamar decks as another vanilla attacker, but quickly got replaced by other options. Where it made its big splash was in Rayquaza GX/Vikavolt. Vikavolt allowed the player to search their deck for a Grass and Lightning energy and attach it to their Pokemon in any way they liked. Oftentimes, the deck would set up multiple Vikavolts, leading to very easy ways to chain attackers. The main attacker of the deck, Rayquaza GX, was a 2-prize attacker that only had 180 HP, which meant that a lot of these decks that have single prizers that can swing for 130, coupled with a few Shrine of Punishment ticks in between turns, could spell disaster. Players began bringing multiple copies of Shiny Lugia in an effort to offset the prize trade, and the games became a lot more even. Shiny Lugia then remained pretty under the radar until the release of Welder and Reshiram and Charizard GX. Welder allowed the player to attach 2 fire energy from their hand to any Pokemon they like and draw 3 cards after. And Reshiram and Charizard GX had an incredibly powerful attack in Flare Strike for 3 fire and colorless energy that did 230 with the lone drawback being that this Pokemon could not attack the following turn. Shiny Lugia made its way into early iterations of this deck as a card that could do a lot of damage early to big threats, as well as one-shot cards with abilities like Jirachi without placing your main attacker in a poor position. The card did not last long in lists as players found better alternatives, but for a short moment, we saw Shiny Lugia come back into the metagame, even if only for a few weeks. Who knew that having fighting resistance and colorless attacks that hit for a perfect 130 damage would make this unlikely card into a staple for a few months in Vikavolt? Shiny Pokemon were never the star they were intended to be, and outside of the initial shock and awe and release in the year 2000, they never garnered any discussion. Forever destined to be side actors in the story, they came quietly, made a small ripple, and left without even saying goodbye. With no more waves of support for this mechanic, it seems likely that this archetype created for collectors and fans of the game will remain completely irrelevant outside of nostalgia players who want to find underexplored decks for their old format gameplay. It's hard to say what kind of support would be needed for these cards to be more prominent, but it's painfully clear that what they had just wasn't enough. Alright, and that's the video. If you can think of any reasons why shiny Pokemon weren't a failed mechanic, or what could have been done to fix them, please let us know down in the comments below.